when so many people said yes to come and speak, and it really was a really fantastic first 6 months for us. So Prakash is just letting a few people in. It looks like our setting maybe has given us a waiting room. So Prakash, if you can just let them in as you come in. And kicking off our event for the new year, and being as a lot of people set new things they want to do for the new year, whatever happens, December the 31st rolling into the first 2 days, just the same as any other days in the year, but for most of us, we're thinking, yeah, let's try to do new things, establish new habits, break bad habits. And for many of us, it's never quite as simple as we think it's going to be. And there's an art behind it, there's no doubt. There's psychology behind it. You're all behavioural people, and there's strategy behind it. And one person who is very specialised in that area is our guest speaker today, Samuel Salzer. You're very welcome, and we're very honoured to have you with us today. And Samuel is a behavioural strategist, changing behaviour for individuals as well as within corporate settings. He's got a fantastic newsletter. If you're not signed up to that already, hop in there and sign up, the Habit Weekly. Last year, he established the very first Behavioural Science Awards, an amazing recognition for all of the people who contribute in their way to behavioural science. We've got a rather swanky habit canvas tool on his website, which we can send you all towards as well to explore. So you're very welcome, Samuel.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
And Samuel, why don't you start by just telling all of our members a little bit about yourself? We can't always presume that everybody knows everybody, albeit in this very sort of specialist, sometimes maybe cliquey world, but maybe you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Samuel.
Sure. Yeah. And first of all, very good to be here. And I see some familiar faces as well. So it's fun to see everyone. I am based in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm not sitting on a nice rooftop, as this image would suggest. Maybe you also see the IKEA sponsorship here. But I'm in Sweden and born and raised, but spent quite a lot of time both living and working in Australia and also in the US, and the last few years pretty much everywhere, it feels like. So yeah, obviously very passionate about how we can apply behavioral science in practice, and been especially fascinated by habits and how we can build everything from, supporting people to build habits to how we can build habit-forming products that help people to exercise more or lead better lives. So yeah, that's the short story, I guess.
And lots of people know things about habits, Samuel, but it's certainly the case that it isn't just getting up on a Monday morning and saying, I want to start this, or I want to stop this. There's more of an art to it than that, isn't there, Samuel?
Well, depends how you see it. We do inevitably build habits all day, every day. We are habit building machines, whether we like it or not. I usually talk about it as being this: if you have a house and a garden, there's going to be things growing in the garden, whether you work on it or not. There's going to be things happening there, but you can then, if you want to, be more active in how you maintain your garden. And it's a little bit similar to habits. We can do our best to kind of manage the weeds if we do it more actively as well.
And when you're giving advice about, say, adopting what it might be a healthy habit, do you encourage people to give it a go themselves in their own way, or would there be very standard approaches that you could outline, where you'd say to people, break it down, or attach it to something else, or are there particular things that you really like, Samuel?
Yeah, well, I do think that kind of part of your question was whether you should do it yourself or how you think about it. And what's still true for the field of behavioral science is that we know some things now, but we know things on a very general, average level. Or you might argue that we know a lot about college students in terms of what changes behavior in college students, because that's a lot of research been done. But we don't do enough on kind of the bigger scale of really what moves the needle for each and every one of us. And so that's kind of what the fun thing is, that part of applying behavioral science into your own life is also letting, you know, to get into yourself. You have to really become more self-aware in order to become very good at changing your own behavior. But there's definitely some core building blocks to building habits. And I'm happy to talk about some of those.
Yeah, maybe you just, before I hand over to Prakash, yeah, maybe you just outline what you think are, so even if we were just talking about any general habits, like the way I was saying, some people say attach it to something you like or break it down into its core parts. What would you say are the sort of top sort of habit assisting tips that you really like, or that you personally use, that you think are most effective?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll share some of the things that I think definitely is the most bang for buck, the most kind of effective. We hear a lot of different fancy things we can do, but I can share some of the things that I know in general be quite impactful. So when we looked at behaviors and we looked at habits as well, in general, specific habits, we know that there's always going to be something that happens before the behavior. We can talk about it as being trigger or cue or activator or antecedent. So obviously it has to do a little bit there. You have to understand, okay, what is activating my behavior? And first of all, how can I, remove the things that I kind of distract me? But some of that stuff is quite obvious. And so I would say what the big thing to work on with activators or triggers is internal triggers. So how to best manage your internal triggers. Because what's very interesting is that you've probably done it yourself, is that when you start blocking things, so you're removing triggers, for example, so you can access certain things that you fall into. Well, if you can't manage your internal triggers, you'll still have the same kind of craving and you don't know how to really manage it. And so you'll fall into doing something else. So you might stop scrolling through social media, but then all of a sudden you're on YouTube instead. And you can start, block everything. But at a certain point, you're usually clever enough to figure out something else you can do. And so what's really important is actually being good at managing these kind of tension points or discomforts that we experience. And when it comes to more, we talk about it from acceptance and commitment therapy, there's this idea of urge surfing, where usually used for when you're trying to quit smoking or those kind of things, where people are taught that the urge that they have, if you're a smoker, sometimes you will almost think that if you don't smoke, my head will explode. Like there's going to be some really bad things happening. And what pretty much people are trained to do is just notice this kind of urge come, like a wave, and then see how they can kind of notice it come, but then pass if they don't do anything. It might be intense for a little bit of a second or so, or maybe in a couple of minutes, but then inevitably the urge is going to kind of dissipate. So similar, like you will surf a wave, you will surf the urge. And when you can do that the first time, especially if you're, if you have addiction, that's a really powerful moment, because then you kind of like prove to yourself that, okay, I can actually manage this myself. I don't need medicine per se to manage this. But then if we reduce this to more of the menial behaviors that we might struggle with, that's still true. And it's quite fascinating to give yourself that thing of showing that, well, actually, I was so close to going into YouTube now or to Twitter or something, but I don't really want to do that right now. And give yourself a moment to kind of let that urge pass, and also maybe more consciously have a say of like, okay, how do I want to spend this time? But that's not a thing that happens in a minute or a day. That takes time to really manage your internal triggers. But if you can do that, that's a lot of the battle has already been won right there. Especially when you break bad habits, that's really, really important. So that's one thing. Some of the general stuff in general, very obvious, but general is just distance management. So putting yourself close to the things you want to do and far away from the things you don't want to do. So we know a lot of research is saying that if you live close to a gym, well, you're more likely to go to the gym. If you live close to McDonald's, well, sadly, you're also more likely to go to McDonald's. And so that's true for all things. And so when we can manage distance in our homes and our lives, that can make a big difference. So pretty much making it easier for ourselves to do the right thing. And I think maybe like last thing that I will leave here, I can tell you more as well, but that I think is underrated is when I often get questions regarding habits, people ask me how many days does it take to form a habit. And the first thing that people hear is maybe 21 days, which is funny because it's actually a plastic surgeon from the 1950s who came up with that term or that number, because he noticed that some of his patients took about 21 days for their facial reconstruction to get used to them, for example, and then wrote a book called Cybernetics that said that, well, maybe it's true for all things in life. And that was a bestseller, and yeah, that's kind of the sad origin of that number. And there's also been some studies on actually in the UK where they've tried to track, okay, how many days on average does it take? And they indicate about 67. But when we actually think about it, take a step back, our brains doesn't operate in days per se. When it comes to going from something that's a very conscious behavior to something that's very automatic, like a habit, what stands between that is usually repetition, and repetition in kind of fixed context. And so it matters less about how many days per se does it take to form a habit, but more about repetitions and doing it in the same context, so the same time, same place, and maybe after the same behavior. And so if you're trying to build, let's say, a habit of every time you leave your desk doing 5 squats, that could probably become a habit in a matter of weeks. However, if you want to build a habit of reading a book or like reading a little bit of a book every Sunday afternoon, the repetition cycles are going to be so much more kind of spread, and it's going to take so much longer time for actually because pretty much what you're trying to do is to form a stronger neural connections in your brain. So that you want the neurons to fire repeatedly over and over again, so that the neurons are quicker and they operate on a quicker kind of dial to connect. And then it's going to take longer time to form that neural connection. So repeating and in a fixed context, that's also a very smart thing to do if you want to build habits per se. Because pretty much what you're trying to do is you're telling your brain that don't think, just do. So yeah, that's three maybe tidbits of advice that could be helpful.
That's fantastic, Samuel. And of course, everybody here, you've all established a great habit by signing in and joining us every Saturday. So you can give yourself a pat on the back if that's all you've done. A great habit you've established. And I will just say there's one of the members who's joined us here, Sharon. I actually met on a habit workshop, and I decided this morning, we now meet quite regularly to chat on a Saturday morning, and I decided that was actually the outfall of the best habit of the habit workshop, was that we were now meeting, like sort of sponsoring each other.
Habit also.
Sponsoring each other. That's Sharon there, Sharon Rod. So I'm going to hand over to Prakash now, if he's not too distracted by having to admit people in the waiting room. But Prakash, I know that you're dying to have a chat with Samuel, and then obviously we'll hand over to any of our members who want to talk to Samuel. So thanks very much, Samuel.
Yeah, thanks. I'll give a quick shout out to Harmony here, who had a really good quote that I usually have on my slides when I talk about neurons, which is that neurons that fire together wire together. And so that's actually, as neuroscientists, forgetting who it was who said that, but it's one of those things that's really good to keep in mind as well if you want to remember how the brain works.
Super, thanks, Samuel. Yeah, if anybody hasn't got the chat box open there, thanks, Harmony, on the ball as always. Harmony has just put in neurons that fire together, wire together. Superb. So I'll mute myself there now.
Thank you so much, Louise and Sam, for joining. Sam, before we start, I mean, we have already started, but if I could just speak about our group, there are some 2,500 people in this group. and we are from across the globe. And around anywhere from 40 to 70 people keep joining regularly for these sessions, when we have a guest coming over. And the thing about the group is we have people here like Devika Jaju, who is just about starting a career into the world of behavioral sciences. And then we have people like Lachaja, who is a PhD, who knows stuff in and out. Then we also have people here like Steve Audit from the Caribbeans, Sebastian Fonzo from Argentina. I think we also have Hike today in the audience here, right? And so these are practitioners of the science themselves, like these are masters. And then we also get to see people like Nuala Walsh, who is one of the founding members behind GABS. And then we also see the people who are our clients, right? So we get, Renusha Rajan. She is from India, and she is a brand manager with Asian, one of the competition, hopefully to Asian Paints soon. And she is looking at the whole brand and communication strategy, and is looking at how do I use behavioral science for crafting this challenger brand and knock off that top dog from the number one position. So it's all of us, and from an entire range, from newbie to people who know the field in and out very well. And it's fantastic we are here together because we want to start the new year talking to someone about something we all struggle with, our habits. And we will talk about habits a lot, but we are very, very curious first to understand what's your journey been like, Sam, into the world of behavioral sciences. How did you get a start there? What happened? Can you just take us through it?
Yeah, it's been a messy journey for sure. I guess some of the main steps along the way was I was studying, first of all, actually economics in Sydney, Australia. And I was very lucky to have a professor who, it was actually true, he was starting to smuggle me books on behavioral economics, pretty much saying like, hey, you should really look into this stuff. And that was somewhat of an eye-opening moment for me. But I still, like, while that was a step into being fascinated about behavior, I actually started working in more of a general kind of consultancy role after having done my studies, because I didn't really know how to get started. It wasn't really clear the path at the time of where to go next. Even though I had some of that passion building up, I didn't really know how to move it forward. And I, at some point after about 2 years in that consultancy role, I was a little bit of a crossroad because I could really see clearly that I could have this career in one way that could be quite successful, but it wouldn't have anything to do with behavioral science in many ways. It just felt like that way. And I had this kind of really, we talked about urge before. I had this really strong urge to really dive deep into all things applied behavioral science. And I've been starting to build connections within the field. And so I did this pretty much thing of just leaving that role and then hoping that things will work out, pretty much determined that I will do whatever I could to figure things out. And yeah, being very lucky that it did. So yeah, I've been on a journey where it felt like almost in some ways being in a jungle with a machete, kind of going my way through, because it was, for me, when I started, it was very hard to know what to do next. It was very, like what we have now, we have so many different options we can kind of very clearly explore. But at the time that didn't really exist. And so yeah, I had to kind of somewhat create my own options. I was part of creating the first behavioral consultancy in Sweden. And I always wrote a book on applied behavioral science. And so I kind of had to do some of that myself. And it's been very rewarding, somewhat challenging, but in a very good way. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing that with us. For those of us who don't know, Sam has got 3 blockbuster essays / articles on his site. One of them is around these books. I think it's a 2-part article, around 50 books, in the first 50 in the second, about what other books you can study as you take yourself on a journey into the world of behavioral sciences. Second one, I think it covers some of the best resources in terms of courses on the web that you can go through and get yourself to become more acquainted with the science. And the third, if I remember correct, is around the state of the world of behavioral science. Where are we going down to next in the next decade? I hope I got the third one right here. And we do want to touch the third one, Sam, is specifically right now. But before we go to the third one, it's a two-part question. How do you apply behavioral science in your own life? Is there some one or two tricks or tips that you want to talk about? Number one. Number two, is there a favorite project that you have consulted with your client where things seemed one way and then the solution kind of surprised you? Any stories you want to share with us?
Yeah, it's funny when it comes to the first question, because I think it's true. If you're working in behavioral science, it's very hard for you to, if you have a hat of sort of like leaving the hat at the office and then not thinking about behavioral science in your private life, because it's very much obviously interconnected. And you see that in most people writing books, they often have personal anecdotes, even if they're, academic professors, they usually base it off the personal life in some ways as well. And so, yeah, I definitely apply behavioral science in all ways in my own life. And it's been quite a fun thing, obviously. And I'm quite lucky for it. Probably the most successful was reading books where I realized that I wanted to read, but only read 2 books in 1 year. And then I started to really consciously build habits around books. And the next year I read about 10 or 12 books. And then the year after, about 25 books. And then actually the year after that, 50. And then it escalated to 125 books the year after. So that little bit took a little bit too far. I kind of had to take things back a little bit, because 125 books is a little bit too much. Kind of defeats the purpose in some ways. So that was just kind of one experience I had of just how this idea of, it takes a little bit of time, building habits. It's easy to look at someone who has a good habit and think, I want to get that and wanted to get that happening, over the next day. But it's a little bit like planting seeds, and it doesn't really matter if you stand there and shout at the seeds, or like if you're annoyed that the seeds doesn't grow, they're going to take some time to grow. You're just going to do your best to give them nourishment and attention. But when it came to a good project, actually one fun project was here in Sweden, there's this app called LiveSum. So I was fortunate to work and help them for about 9 months, and they have about 40 million users where they're aiming to help users to improve their diet, especially. So to eat better, and have all of these meal plans that they kind of give the users. And one of the things we did, which was quite tricky, was that they really wanted to have a starting off plan that kind of was like this 3-week weight loss plan, they called it. And for me, that really was like painful in my ears, because I know that there's a lot of misconceptions around losing weight. That it's like this kind of crash course diet. So you jump into a diet, and then it becomes a yo-yo thing where you stop it, and then you gain weight, and then you do it again. It's a very vicious, bad cycle. And so I pretty much said, well, we can do that, but on one condition, that we do it kind of the right way. And so what we did was pretty much just thinking from a habit perspective, where, okay, the whole idea was to give people a kind of a start on these plans so that they kind of get started, but not so much of like losing as much weight as possible in 3 weeks, but really kind of build habits in the best way those 3 weeks. And so, for example, while there was reducing calories, that was kind of in this 10 to 15% margin, where if you eat about 10% less calories than you normally do, you don't actually notice it. It's kind of like you actually don't feel any cravings or hunger stuff and stuff. So there's a lot of those things happening. What was very fascinating that I was really exploring in that project was this idea of what happens when we fail. Because it's always going to happen. We're always going to fail at some point. If you have a habit and you have a streak, that streak is going to be broken at some point. And so how does that feel? Well, it feels terrible. It really sucks to fail at something and feel like you're failing and doing the wrong thing when you're supposed to do something else. And I was really aware that that's going to be the biggest challenge for this project. And that the biggest challenge would be that, that people would maybe miss one meal, and then they will feel like failures, and then they would stop using the app, for example. And so when we worked with this, a lot of the focus was then, how can we reduce that feeling? And so the most successful intervention in that project was adding cheat meals into the meal plan. So giving people a license to use a cheat meal was the most successful thing to boost their attention. Because then people, like, if they really feel like a pizza, then they could have the pizza and they wouldn't feel bad for having it. It was kind of part of the meal plan anyway. And so that was just a good reminder for me since then to really be aware of just how can you make failure doesn't feel like a bad thing. And, you know, as part of kind of the learning journey also. So yeah.
Sam, thanks for sharing that story about, one way I keep on finding, I keep on falling into a trap is, and it's very easy for me to advise people and say, keep it limited, right? Focus on one or two things. Then the other day, someone pointed out to me and said, listen, look at your own schedule. You don't seem to know how to prioritize. You got too many things on the list. No wonder you get nothing done. And it came as a rude shock to me. It kind of connected with what you said. We'll be opening up the entire session very soon to all the questions. So folks who are here with us, please have your questions ready. And before we go there, one last question here from my side. It connects 2-3 things. One was noticing something which happened on LinkedIn earlier, I think a day or 2 days back. I think it was Nick Hobsons who put up a small post. It was a screenshot of something Simon Sinek said about opportunities being something, you don't give up and then the door will open, something, one generic one-liner, inspirational line. And I think Nuala, if I'm not mistaken, he tagged you in that, and that's how I noticed that. And so one is this whole availability of generic one-lining inspirational lines, right? So we all seem to see it and like, yeah, I know this in this sense, right? So you're inspired for the moment. Second is you look at today's world, there is such an overwhelming amount of literature available for anyone to pick up, right? You can just go online and you don't even have to actually buy a book or get into a course. You could just search for it. People are writing it on their blogs. And I think the question then is, and because you are someone from this field who understands habits very well, is it actually making all of us better people, all this information available out there in the world that we can see? Or are we not you, because you are the expert, but are we people who are simply parroting this lines out there and walking around smug saying, oh, we understand, but in reality, we are just making no changes to our life, walking around with this illusion of, we get this. This is so simple. Where do you think is the reality, or is this something else altogether, Sam?
Well, I don't want to be the one who says another quote here, but there's a famous one of a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. And if we look at behavioral science, it would definitely indicate that there's a lot of examples and reasons for why, if we know a little bit about something, we generally have an overconfidence in that topic of sort. And also maybe, like you say, how we apply it in our own lives. I've noticed it on a personal level, whenever I do something like a seminar or I'm teaching, it's always this case of people within that setting. You always have an overconfidence in what you can absorb in an hour or in a day. And just by watching a video or attending a seminar or something, you think that you're just learning it and it's stored in your brain and now you know it. But then the day after, you're going to probably have some, if you have some colleagues asking you like, oh, what did you learn in the seminar? You'll realize how little of that you actually retain, unless, I'm trying desperately to figure out like good ways to structure seminars where you can actually do as much as possible, so you kind of retain as much as possible, but it's still hard. And it really goes into this idea that just being exposed to information doesn't transfer that into knowledge. And so it's these kind of steps of just information turning into knowledge and knowledge turning into action that is much easier said than done. Again, to that point. So yeah, definitely true. And there's actually, I listened to a great podcast on this. It's called Question question everything or something. It's the Freakonomics. They have a new podcast where they pretty much talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect and this topic specifically, and had some good points there. So I recommend checking out that episode, questioning something, Freakonomics. Yeah.
I think Alexander says I think it's called No Stupid Question. That's what he's saying on the chat.
Yes.
No stupid question.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Sam, we open it up, Louise. Let's help Sam pick up the questions here. Number one.
Okay, yeah. So, Samuel, I'd like to direct you over to the comment that Harmony made. And she was talking about, and I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Harmony, it was the comment about lists. Do you want to unmute yourself there, Harmony, or shall I just keep rattling on? She should join us in a minute, yeah. Hi, Harmony.
Hi.
Yeah, you were asking, I love your question because I'm a complete list addict. I have lists for everything. I hate choice in my life, where I even take the front thing in my wardrobe every morning and fill it from the back, so I don't even have to choose what I wear.
Yeah.
So, so Harmony.
I love that.
Harmony, could you just talk to Samuel a little bit about lists and your little theory?
Yeah, my grandmother loved her. She always had lists, and one day, I think my grandfather read at her eulogy. She said, "I've gone too far. I have a list of all my lists." I thought that was beautiful. I don't do so well with lists, and my boyfriend he's really good, at lists. He's very sort of different kind of personality type completely to me. And, he's always talking about the Pomodoro method and blah, blah, blah. And I really struggle with it because I find that my motivation tends to be driven more by starting something and just feeling that, the motivation that happens from just starting something. I'm kind of in the middle of a renovation in my kitchen, sort of. I have some issues, and just getting the motivation to do it was what got me to really get some stuff done. It wasn't, a list was helpful, and it was helpful, but I struggle with that, because I don't know if I could ever form the habit of always having those lists. And I'd like to challenge my own sort of personality traits to be more effective in my life. I see my boyfriend being very effective, and I think it is helpful, but getting that pattern, getting that habit, getting those neurons together to actually have that habit, and then challenging it, like my creativity, I feel like a lot of that creativity is driven from just saying, just start it, and so it's the struggle of that motivation, where that's coming from. So that's it.
Yeah, no, I think it's in general something in terms of going back to my point of building self-awareness, in terms of, I think somewhat lists are overrated as a general tool for, productivity or self-management. It works really well for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. And I've had to, be humble and be humbled by myself in terms of how bad I've been at following my own lists, sometimes on my own checklist. If you look at my reminder app, like I have so many lists that I never completed, and I switched app just to get rid of that, like those lists. And so I had to figure out like a way to work with it, for example, myself. And so what I do now is very much trying to keep things as simple as possible. So having a rule of, okay, I start the day usually listing 5 things I want to do that day, but never more than 5 things. And then I can add things that I will consider for the next day, but that's for the next day. And so that kind of make things much easier. And then I guess second part of that question of sort is, when you start a lot of things, how do you manage to actually complete them as well? And there is interesting with the motivation in terms of, so motivation is this very cruel thing that kind of goes up and down and changes from day to day and minute to minute. And so the only way to really get around that is trying to do. So build motivation by doing. And so pretty much trying to give yourself license to do something very small and little, and then that being okay. So actually I'm working on a project which is called Habit Coach Professionals, where we're trying to help coaches to learn how they can use behavioral science to coach their clients. And one of the fun stories that came out or came to my way this week was someone who's a coach who's trying to figure out themselves how to apply it in their own life, and then always struggling with cleaning and wanting to keep a clean home, and always had these really big expectations. And then when they set the expectation really low about just cleaning for about 2 minutes in a day, I think it was 5 minutes even maybe, but still quite small. And it felt quite basic to do that on the first day and second day. But then the third day, you know, she was really noticing that, okay, I'm getting actually some stuff cleaned. It feels pretty good to do something. And so I might just do a little bit more today. I might just do a little bit more. So she did like a couple more minutes the day after. And then as she started to build this kind of like just by doing, also the cleaning may become more fun because she couldn't really fail. And so everything she did a little bit more than 5 minutes became like a success. And then she ended up finishing the week by cleaning for 15 minutes and cleaning everything that she had left to clean. So I think that's just an example, but yeah, it's usually procrastination comes from feeling overwhelmed is one of the main reasons. And when we see some project that we started and we're like, okay, I don't really know how to finish it. Well, don't worry about that right now. Worry about the first small step. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks, Samuel. That's great. And that sort of feeds into the concept of BJ Fogg's tiny habits, and that we don't set
for sure
too big a task. Balakrishna is talking about the role of rewards in habit formation. And I guess there, I don't know if Balakrishna, I can't see you on camera, but I don't know if he's particularly talking about anything he's got in mind. The sort of thing that's coming to my mind is, I think, is it Katie Miltman talks about, you know, say, listening to your favorite podcast whilst you're on your exercise bike, that sort of rewarding yourself with the behavior. But yeah, would you like to talk a little bit about rewards, Samuel?
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. And I think especially since there's a lot of misconceptions. Because I think a lot of times when people think about rewards, it's about adding something good, right? And you might have read The Power of Habits, or you might have seen, you know, Q, I don't know exactly what it says, but it's Q action reward, I think is the loop he has there. And that's a little bit of a misinterpretation of the science. And so we know that habits or behavior repeats because of a positive consequence, but that can also come from removing something bad. So that's a very fascinating thing when it comes to habits, and that we can build habits by oftentimes doing things that removes a discomfort. Like we drink obviously coffee because it tastes good maybe. And while it somewhat gives us energy, a lot of the reason why I actually do it is because it removes the tiredness. It removes our kind of foggy brain in the morning. And so that's a very important aspect. Whenever we talk about rewards and habits, that's really important to remember. That, yeah, you don't have to add something good per se, but if it removes something bad, that works too. And then to your example with Katie Miltman, so when we then break it up to seeing that, okay, I like to think about it as you have the reward from doing the behavior itself. You have the direct consequence or reward from having completed the behavior. And then you have the delayed consequence that maybe happens minutes to days to, you know, years to having done the behavior. And what's fascinating, if you look at something, let's say a lot of people want to do, let's say exercise, or maybe even better, I was going to think about something, let's say some of the big challenges in the world, let's say climate change. A lot of reasons why, for example, doing a lot of climate positive behaviors can be hard is because the direct consequence from doing them might be negative in terms of we might not do the fun thing we wanted to do, but we do a little bit worse thing, or whatever we do, usually the big consequence comes much, much later. So it's really important when we think about habits is that the positive consequence has to happen during or right after doing the behavior. And so attention bundling that you mentioned from Katie Milkman is a way of doing it during the behavior. When you feel the thing you should do isn't very fun, you can add it with something you want to do. And then you only listen to your favorite podcast when you meal prep, for example, or while you clean. That's one way. Another way is, for example, I know some people that are really successful with like micro rewards, where they literally like just having completed the behavior, just add like $2 to or pounds to a savings account for a vacation. And then that's not that much in the moment, but it feels good. It feels good to do that thing of like, and then it's really obviously fun to see that grow. And then obviously even more fun if you can take that vacation at some point. but the thing we shouldn't do is to say like, okay, if I complete this 50 times, then I'm going to put in $50 into my bank account. But we should do every time I do that, I should put in $1. That would be a better strategy, for example.
Thanks, Samuel. That's great. I've just seen there the newest question popped up there from Steve. It's kind of long, so maybe I'll ask you there, Steve, to elaborate on what you were looking to ask Samuel. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. Thanks a lot, and happy New Year to everyone. Samuel, thank you also. Yeah, my question is kind of long, but I think that it perhaps connects to what Prakash was saying a bit earlier about, is it either this or that, or is there something else? Are we all trying to think about how to become better at changing our behavior? Perhaps, and this is just a hypothesis I have, that perhaps deep down we are probably thinking if we can change all these little bad habits we have, that we might become some sort of much better human being. And therefore, part of that is a kind of consideration of self as not being complete, as, just needing to do all these really cool things to be such a smart person, such a bright person, such a gifted person, and so on. However, the reality is that the social determinants of our lives allow us to do in every time and place. Since I believe that might apply to a pretty, small sector of the society. So my question is, if my hypothesis is right, how do we reconcile, wanting to change these habits, these habit formation techniques, and so on, with a real life loaded with complexity, vulnerability, ambiguity, and social determinants that keep dragging us down?
I might have missed part of your hypothesis there. It might have broken up a little bit. Could you repeat the hypothesis?
Yeah, I'm thinking that sometimes we all want to be these kind of superhuman beings. Therefore, more and more we might think that there is a lack in us, and therefore we might think we need to change this habit or that habit or the other habit. However, I do know we live in worlds. I mean, certainly in my world, there are social determinants that pretty much act against one trying to be this perfect human being. Yeah. In fact, I remember when Kaz was on here, he referred to a very, very good book called Scarcity by Mullainathan.
Yes.
That's my question.
Great question. Yeah. First of all, by the way, I want to say you have a beautiful bookshelf behind you. Some really great books, I see.
Yeah, you have good eyes.
Yeah, anyway. Yes. So what I do think when it comes to habits is somewhat of a problem right now is that it's seen as this panacea or like the solution to all problems. And that if we can only figure out our habits, then we would live life happy forever after kind of thing. And kind of to your point, this idea of also like diminishing returns in terms of, while there are obviously certain people talk about like keystone habits, certain things we can do in our lives that if we improve them, let's say our sleep, that's going to have ripple effects that's going to be quite important in getting ourselves to maybe be productive or better parents or whatever it is. But at some point, it can definitely be a problem of having this illusion that you can be this perfect, like you say, superhuman person who's living this life where everything is happening in clockwork, all of your habits is fall in place. But without thinking about it, you go to the gym, you work out, you have a nice whatever smoothie or something, you eat something healthy, like all of these things perfectly out. But I'd say at the same time, as you say, it's really hard to do that when you're swimming somewhat upstream, when we have a lot of force in our lives, most of us, that pretty much make it impossible to be perfect, like you say. The environment is so important when it comes to all things behavior, and to neglect all the things that happens in our environments on a natural basis, from our getting sick to a family member getting sick to freaking coronavirus, don't get me started on that. So it's I would say, to your point, you're definitely on something. I think we should be much more kind to ourselves, and also, maybe not expect ourselves to be these superhuman habit makers.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's super. And thanks, Samuel. And I'm super delighted that it's gone in that direction, because just earlier I told Prakash that my plan for this year was to be more cat. And I've been reading, sorry guys, I've been reading Feline Philosophy by John Gray. And I just have to share something that's fantastic. Chapter 2, Why Cats Do Not Struggle to Be Happy. And other animals do not need to divert themselves from their condition. So that really sort of feeds into what Steve was saying. We are tough on ourselves, and look, we're all pretty good people. And maybe we don't need to keep thinking about these things. We should stop, but maybe we should invest more time in thinking about the good things about ourselves. So Samuel, we're aware of the time here now. We don't like to really go over the hour. We are with people's time on a Saturday, but there's a very good question come in from Devika. Devika, would you like to ask the question yourself, Devika?
Yeah, sure. I hope I'm audible.
Thanks. Yeah, we can hear you, Devika, talking about something that affects obviously everybody, which is trying to remove apps, and then they ping back on, and then they're talking to you and you're trying to avoid it.
Primarily for me, that applies to Instagram. And so I know that I have a tendency to be on the app a lot. And then I thought that if I remove it, it's just easier. So then that'll reduce the habit. And then when I downloaded it again, I noticed that I was back on it the same amount. So Samuel, my question would be like, how do you develop consistency more with dealing with a bad habit, especially when you know that you get distracted by it?
Right. Yeah, great question. So one way to think about this when it comes to bad habits that you still somewhat want to have in your life, the metaphor I usually use is with snacking. So that, for example, I have a partner, and so for me, if we have chocolate at home, it doesn't really matter. I can have like one piece of chocolate and then put it away, and that's fine. I'm happy with that. But that's probably going to disappear within the hour because she's going to eat it up, that part. But then if you sweep that to, let's say, chips instead, it's going to be opposite. I pretty much, it's fascinating just in some ways, like following my own rationality of like how I can rationalize, finish a bag of chips. It's like, it's my mind, it has some superpowers when it comes to chips, of like finding a reasons for finishing that bag of chips. And so what the kind of the metaphor tries to tell is that there's some things that we can kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of have in small amounts, and we can be happy with, but certain things we have to almost like abstain from completely to really manage. And so when it comes to social media, it becomes tricky. There's been a lot of these, I think it's been vogue or in trend to have these detoxes and cleanses from social media and so on. But as anyone knows from more, serious addictions, is that if you come back from your rehab and you're placed in the same environment as you were when you developed the bad addiction, you're very, very likely to develop that addiction again. And so yeah, I don't know if I have like a perfect answer when it comes to something like social media. If you have something like, let's say, Instagram, that you've noticed that you really struggle with, even when you take breaks and so on, then I would still probably experiment with setting certain, maybe, yeah, depends how important Instagram is in your life, I guess. Either like completely abstaining for it, or finding ways to, like the more extreme ways. I know people do some crazy stuff and apply behavioral science to themselves. So like having, actually like they give away the password, and then they can scroll as much as they want on Instagram, but only on the weekends. And so they give the password to someone else and they don't know about it, for example. So you can also do extreme things if you really want to stick to Instagram. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Maybe give some thought.
Thank you. I think the changing the environment bit or coming back to the same environment probably like that hit the nail for me here. And thank you. Actually, it was a great response.
Thanks. Great question, Davika. Thanks so much. And I think we've got time for one more question. And Mariah, you had a question which I think fed from sort of our human nature and how much that is relevant.
So thank you so much for coming. I mean, my question stems from kind of playing with things intuitively with myself, obviously, because I'm just a guinea pig to all of my great ideas. So my question is, are some people more gifted to intuitively start changing behaviors on their own by recognizing the triggers and finding solutions to some of those issues? It almost takes you back to the nature versus nurture. For example, we had Davika, and I could say, what is it that you love the most? I love red wine, so I can go bottle easy to the second and the third, but then running the next day is a horrible experience. So I decided, you know what? I drink a glass, and if I'm good and I gotta turn off the light, I'll have a chocolate, because I love chocolate. And so I kind of switched and said, chocolate is better than wine. And so intuitively, I figured that out. So from your experience, have you seen people being more intuitive, more gifted to recognize the trigger and then replace it with something else?
Yeah, so I do think there's obviously some difference there from person to person. I think two things I've noticed that plays a part is this combination of self-awareness and curiosity, or like, so first being self-aware of the things that you do and the things that kind of triggers you to do those things, and kind of noticing that and so on. And then being somewhat curious to, so there's this theory which pretty much tries to explain why we sometimes seek comfort and sometimes seek novelty. And it's called exploration versus exploitation theory. And so it pretty much talks about, well, sometimes through our lives, we're more likely to explore and sometimes we're likely to exploit. So when we're in our teenage years, we're very much more, that's when we're at peak exploration. We have very high risk tolerance. And so we're very open to explore things and try things and do things. But then as we get older, that risk tolerance changes a little bit. We become a little more risk averse, and we're not as likely to explore things, but more exploit the things we already discovered. So the movies that we like, we watch more. The food we like, we eat more of, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a difference there in terms of, if you have the self-awareness and you notice these things, depending a little bit on your, call it like your exploration or exploitation tendencies, that's going to be a difference. If you're someone who's very high in exploration, I would say they're probably more likely to then also try new things and see how, well, what if I try chocolate? Or what if I do something different? What if I do something else? Whereas if you're very low risk aversion and you're very kind of sticking to what you know, it can be also tied into a little bit of fatalism of like, thinking that you have a very low locus of control in terms of, well, this is all I can do. Well, you know, if wine is the thing I want to drink, so you know, you feel a little more limited there. So that was actually a very good question. It's a really good question. I could talk about that for a long time, but that's kind of my my answer to that question.
So thank you so much for explaining that. First of all, I like to be complimented. So having a teenager mind at 50 plus is an amazing thing. So thank you for saying that. And then I love the idea of explorers, which means that not all of us are explorers. And then that will answer my question that I had in the back of my mind. Some are explorers, some will go out and chart the territories, the new territory. I mean, that's how Americas were discovered. And others are more, we're following, we're going to now go and toil the land and plant and, you know, be the farmers. Whereas me, I'm like, okay, America was discovered, what's next? Kind of a thing. So thank you for saying that, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Super question, Mariah, and great answers, Samuel. And there's been some great chat going on in the chat at the side there as you've been talking to Samuel. And so this was a great idea of Prakash's, who was building up in our months before Christmas, building up, encouraging people to adopt new skills as the year wound down, and said to me, wouldn't it be great if maybe we could have Samuel in to talk about habits? So we are absolutely delighted, Samuel, that you gave us your time to come and chat with everyone. We really appreciate you giving us your time. It's been extremely interesting to hear your knowledge on the subject. And I'm just going to hand back now to Prakash to wrap up the meeting. And thank you everybody for joining us again. It's really lovely to see you all in the new year.
Thank you, Louise. Sam, I remember, I noticed some time back you said that there's such an overwhelming amount of information and we are all part of these workshops and you feel like, yeah, I've learned something, right? And the question is, did we really learn? And one thing that some of us found helpful was almost said explicitly during our presentations to our clients or to students or to entrepreneurs during this workshop, saying there's a good chance we're going to forget almost all the things we are going to say right now in a week from now. But here is one thing you want to hold on to. Pay attention to this. You don't want to forget this line, right? So that kind of gets their attention, saying, oh, okay, let me pay attention here. As we are going and the meeting comes to an end, we are all here on a journey, right? Trying to build up new habits. What is the one advice you want to give us all out here so that we can be better people when this year ends?
So I'm going to somewhat reinterpret that because I really like where you're going. But what I also, to your point, what I think is going to be the most powerful is actually when I'm going to play this back to the audience in terms of like, what is one thing you learned today? Like, what is the one thing you want to kind of take away from today that you want to put to practice or you want to kind of make use of? Because again, you mentioned it before, there's so many different people here from different walks of life and different places. And so again, I think to the point we've been talking about today, we're all different. And so that will be kind of my final question, actually, to really reinforce that learning to you, all of you, and to make sure that you leave with something useful, not what I tell you, but actually what has been meaningful to you today. So that's my question to you, pretty much everyone watching, is that what is one thing you want to take away from today? Maybe write it down or tell it to someone else, because that's a great way to remember as well, to share an insight that usually get it to stick better.
What a lovely way to end this thing back. Thanks so much, Sam, man. I really like that. That's been very, very helpful. I think we'll ask that question to ourselves. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's 2021, but wear your mask, stay safe, take care of your loved ones. Ignore the trolls online because there's a better way of living life. And have fun. Happy New Year, everyone. And have a fantastic year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Be
Bye-bye.
more cat.
Happy New Year.
Thanks. Really great.
I know,
to speak
everyone.
with you all.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks so much, Samuel. That was brilliant. Thanks, Kat.